Welcome to Author's Alcove, the reading nook. This is your host, Agnes Wolfe. Today, I have horror and urban fantasy writer Shannon Lawrence. She is a fan of all things fantastical and frightening. She writes primarily both horror and fantasy, as I just mentioned. Her stories can be found in over 40 anthologies and magazines, and her 3 solo horror short story collections, Blue Sludge Blues and Other Abominations, Bruised Souls and Other Torments, and Happy Gula Days are available now. You can also find her as a co-host of the podcast Mysteries, Monsters, and Mayhem, which as soon as I saw that you had a podcast with that, I was like, okay, I'm definitely going to have to check that out because that sounds like right up my alley.
Yay.
When she's not writing, she's hiking through the wilds of Colorado and photographing her magnificent surroundings, where coincidentally, there's always a place to hide a body or birth a monster. And also, I just started her book, and it's also where her book begins. I don't think it stays there, but that is where it begins. So, welcome, Shannon. How are you today?
I'm good. How are you?
Good. Do you mind just sharing a little bit about what brought you into the writing world?
I was reading from really early, and so just love the fiction world. And it turns out probably part of it was because I'm autistic. I was just diagnosed. So um books for autistic girls tend to be a big escape, as it turns out. So I was a prolific reader, and then I wanted to tell my own stories. I love telling stories, and I had 4 younger siblings. I was the oldest of 5, so I was telling them stories and stuff all the time as a kid. So I just kind of fell into it, like I can do this. I've been reading it all long enough. I can do this. So yeah, it came about, and I finally had, well, time in a sense. When I had my first child is when I kind of started getting to do that a little bit more. So I was no
I,
longer working 60-hour weeks.
so
Um,
apparently we're both big into fantasy. This is her book, fantasy, and I do like horror sometimes, but it has to be very mild horror. But one thing I really was interested in this because it's called Myth Stalker Wendigo Nights is it's about when like she's a stalker, so she stalks these myths, and it says Wendigo Nights. And the only thing that I have really heard about Wendigos is from the TV series Charmed. I don't know if you were
I
familiar.
watched it like all the way through, so I didn't see the Wendigo one.
So there is one Wendigo episode, but can you just describe what a Wendigo is and how it plays out in your particular world?
Yeah, so Wendigo is a largely First Nations piece of lore. And it's actually a human who's committed kind of one of the cardinal sins, which is cannibalism. And they've been possessed because of this. There are other ways to become it. I kind of go into that a bit in the book, but primarily it comes back to cannibalism. And this was born of just think about winters way back before technology and all that. A lot of people were stuck in their homes. Bad things happened. This was kind of this great fear that somebody might resort to this, and probably they did sometimes. And so it's actually a spirit, it's a manitou. I don't go into that in the book, but yeah, it overtakes the person, and then they crave human flesh, and they can't eat any other kind of meat. They can't do anything. And the only way to do anything about this is to kill the person who's been possessed. And in this book, she has to figure out how not to do that because it's somebody important to her.
Oh, interesting. I have not gotten that far because I've read for I think it was like between a half hour and 45 minutes with a few breaks in there. Right before here, and I'm like, ooh, I cannot wait to finish this. I am so excited to finish it. But what I noticed first I want to talk about Selena. I love the name. Can you just describe her a little bit, who she is, and just her history as well as her maybe character arc?
Yeah, so Selena is like me, part native, and I didn't want to write a full blood character because I am not full blood. And I stress at the end of the book in a note that I didn't grow up on a reservation, so she did not either. I'm not trying to step into a world that's not my own. I'm trying to go from my own experiences. And so things coming with being mixed are going to show up in the books, but um she she's on her own. Her parents are out of the picture. She's not married. She's just doing her thing and out there finding all these creatures and she has a lot of history, and it's going to come out as things go through. Her father is actually a big sore subject in this book, and that again will come out. That comes out in little pieces to be addressed, and I'm trying to think of how to say anything without giving spoilers because stuff comes out and it becomes obvious why certain things are so important. But yeah, so she's facing kind of her own demons while she's dealing with this particular case that she gets called up to do. And the person who calls her as her mentor is the person who took her under his wing when her dad was not there for her, even though he was the one who kind of dragged her into this line. And his whole thing was basically the parent throwing the kid in the lake and saying, "You'll learn to swim." And he did that with monsters. So uh that is where she's coming from when she goes through this. So she has a lot of personal things to face while she's hunting down also this creature and trying to figure out research at the same time. And she has a ticking clock because once the soul's been completely taken over by the spirit, it's over. The only thing to do will be to kill that person. And if they're killed at that point, their soul's forever gone. So that's why she's trying to beat that clock.
Okay. So I now know just a little. I was about ready to get to where I think that you just shared with me. I'm like, okay, all right. Okay. So Selena, though, is not just a normal human that happens to do this myth stalking. She like has fast healing. Can you share a little bit about that?
Yeah, she has so myth stalkers are actual beings in this world, and she's born with that, and it gives her she has advanced healing. She's a little faster than average. She's a little stronger than average. So it does come with these abilities that help her and equip her to be able to fight the creatures that she's going after. And the creatures in general are going to be those that belong to native lore.
One of the things that I noticed that you started in Colorado, and that's where you live, right?
Yeah.
And so I was somewhat familiar with, because, I've gone to the Garden of Gods. And
Oh,
so, yeah. So that's like one of my husband and I, we like to travel. And that's one of our favorite places is Colorado in general, not that particular, but like Colorado in general. So I have to ask you, because she starts out by chasing what's kind of like a Sasquatch or Bigfoot.
yeah.
Do you believe in that there's actually Sasquatches or Bigfoot in Colorado?
I choose to. Like the logical part of me, but I choose to because that was the first cryptid that I learned about. And I remember just eating up everything about it. And there was even a big magazine. I don't remember if it was Time or People or what, but they had this whole article on Sasquatch and people's experiences with Sasquatch. And I actually still remember one of the illustrations because it was a woman who had claimed that a giant Sasquatch had picked her up and then peeled her clothes off like a banana. And so the illustrator had done the woman like in a banana suit and the Sasquatch is peeling her. So I will forever remember that. I wish I still had it because I tore it out of the magazine and I kept it and I must have gotten rid of it, when I got to be an adult. So, but yeah, so he's in the book, he's the Gog monster, Garden of the Gods monster, right? But my thing hearing about the Gog monster was, oh, well, that's just a Bigfoot, right? Like when I first heard stories about that. So I was like, yeah, we have to do that.
So is what's really funny is my husband is one of the most rational humans that I know. He's very logical, but that is one thing that he believes in is Bigfoot, and he will like he will argue with you, and he will share all these different things why he believes that my hair is all funny. I was like, okay, my hair is funny, and so then I tried to fix it, and then it got all funky. Okay, there we go. But no, he is like one of the most logical human beings, most rational person I know, and he believes in Bigfoot. And he will tell you like yeah, but there's this, there's this, there's this. And then he had a whole theory behind it because he's actually like researched this. And so I was just curious if you believed in
I mean,
Sasquatch.
it's the most universal creature, like cryptid in this country. You know, all the different states have their own little cryptids and stuff, but they all kind of have a something related to Bigfoot. And if you look, Sasquatch is only one tribe's name for it, but there are so many tribes that also have a name for it other than that. It's just that when I grew up in Oregon, before I lived a few places, but that, Sasquatch was what I heard all the time. But yeah, it's just so universal that it's hard to completely dismiss it.
There's also in other continents too, which is very interesting. Like they have different names and from different continents too. That's
Mhm.
my husband has educated me on this. And it's so funny because he is not somebody who likes horror. He doesn't like fantasy. He reads action adventure, but that is one thing that he believes. And maybe it's because we do like to go to Colorado and there's like signs, beware, or
Yes.
like, so we always have to take pictures of those because it gets him excited.
Yeah, if you drive up Pikes Peak, there's a
Yep.
big crossing sign there and everything. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. So, what got you into so this is considered urban fantasy. It's a little bit is there a little bit of horror element to it or
Yeah, and that's kind of what I loved about it in the first place. When I first discovered urban fantasy, I'd been reading just a lot of horror before that. And then I was like, what? There's this whole other like fantasy world where the horror is real. Basically, like the monsters from horror are real and accepted in general in urban fantasy, right? And I just devoured it. I think first, oh, Laurel K. Hamilton was the first one I read, then Kelly Armstrong. Then I got to meet Kelly Armstrong at my first writers conference I ever went to, and that was awesome. So, yeah, horror did lead me into it. And then it was hearing that, oh, there's this, what do you mean, like the vampires own nightclubs? Like, what are you talking about? So I had to read it, and that's when I got into it.
definitely. And you actually have been writing short stories before this. This is your first novel, but you've been doing short stories for a long time. What caused the shift in your writing? Like what made you decide, okay, I'm going to tackle a novel?
I I feel like if I ever stop pushing and learning more in the writing world and trying new things, that I'm probably done, you know? So writing and reading is so much about exploring in the first place. And so I was doing short stories and I built a career off of those short stories, which why I have a book about it and everything. And I was right there with novelists at writing conferences and Comic Cons and stuff, doing panels, and nobody ever looked at it as less than what they were doing, you know? So I love short stories. And I think that they are a particularly great medium for horror because it's hard. You can't hold suspense over an entire novel the same way you can in a short story for horror. So they can pack a bigger punch sometimes than a novel can for that. But yeah, I'd been doing it and I'd gotten to a really good place with it. And I was like, all right, it's time to switch things up and not get comfortable. Because I was getting comfortable. And that was the thing. When it started to become rote, I was like, okay, yeah, it's time to explore something different.
So that was actually going to bring me, I was going to bring up your other book that is actually, because you are a business major, correct?
Yes.
And so you kind of know you kind of view writing as a business. Can you just kind of describe like how your business background has helped you in the writing world?
Well, and I should say that I got the business degree only a few years ago. So I was publishing before that and I was just learning things as I went, right? And I have a blog that I'm not as active on anymore, but for a while there, everything I learned that was going on that blog so that nobody else had to learn it the hard way. Because when I was kind of coming up through the writing world, again, short stories weren't the primary thing anybody was talking about. They wanted to talk about novels, that all the workshops at conferences had to do with novels. And so I had to learn everything on my own the hard way. And I don't feel like people should have to do that. There's no reason it should be a struggle to learn the dynamics of everything. And there's a lot of little things like you're contacting these editors of magazines and anthologies, and nobody was telling me what to say, like how you did that. So that was something that once I had that business degree and could look at it with that eye and see what I'd done, I was like, yeah, I'm going to put out something that maybe helps somebody, not have to kind of claw their way up, right?
And what's the name of that book?
It's The Business of Short Stories is the main title of it. So, and it goes into, because I did have an emphasis in marketing in my degree, there's a big chunk that is marketing. And I had two friends who do marketing for careers also beta read the book for me to make sure that everything was where that needed to be. So, and they said it was solid, so I'm going with it. But there is a big chunk, because what do we all hate as writers? Marketing. It's kind of a bad word.
I would agree with that. I think that's the hardest thing for everybody. When I talk to writers, is they're like, what's the hardest part of writing for you? Marketing.
Marketing, right? Because it has nothing to do with what you're doing, like the creative stuff you're doing. And you're like, now I have to spend all this time doing this instead of writing. And it's frustrating.
What are some things that you learned through writing that book and just publishing your own short stories?
Uh, well, just really the dynamics of it, I think, was the hardest part. I teach a lot of workshops on short story writing and how it's different, and also on horror, but that's not in there. And it's just a lot of people go in thinking a short story could be, say, a chapter of a bigger book. And unless each of your chapters is written with a full story arc, that's not true. A short story, even flash fiction, has to have a full story arc. And I think that's the big thing that I end up talking to people about, because that's where they're kind of screwing up when they're trying to write short stories at the beginning. And especially if all their emphasis has been on novel writing, is that struggle of, so I'm supposed to take a whole story arc and condense that into a short story. Well, yeah, but you don't have all the subplots that a novel has. Novels have a billion things going on. A short story should have really a primary thing going on and could maybe have like a minor subplot, right? So, and obviously also the thing that I've learned at this point is there are rules, but as creatives, once we know the rules well enough, then we can break them, right? So I'm kind of like, follow the rules at the beginning and then learn how to break them. And so there are no set rules at that point.
What is one marketing thing that you have done that you actually have found quite a bit of success with?
Man, that one's ever changing, morphing, because everything, like, once everybody figured out Facebook went, yeah, we want to monetize this. So we're just going to go ahead and take this away. Now nobody's going to see your post if you put a link if you put a link in your main post, you get squelched in the algorithms. So then you have to learn to do your post, make sure you have an image, then put your link in the comments underneath it. So it's things like that. But Facebook and my blog were my primary marketing. And so you do need a website. I use my blog as my website because it's the best way for me to keep it fresh, because I have a full-time job and a podcast and teenagers and family and, all kinds of stuff. So my rule, my big thing, my big takeaway on that is pick one thing that you can focus on. Don't kill yourself doing everything they say that you need to be doing. Like TikTok was the big new, everybody has to do TikTok and you have to do these videos and you can make billions in sales. Well, it's already starting to change on TikTok, because as soon as these platforms realize that you're making money off of them, they're like, well, then we need to make money off of you. So it was Facebook, then it was Instagram, then it was that. So the big thing is just know what you're good at, what you're comfortable doing. I hang out on Facebook, so that is where my focus is. I've done targeted ads on Facebook, and honestly, it's the organic posts that do the most for me. Somehow I post things, I post things that people will share, like memes and stuff like that. And when they share that out from your page, it has your page on there. And that's probably where I get a lot of new followers, is they see the meme and whatever I said about it, and then they come and they like my page. And so it just widens my audience. Are there better ways to do it? Yes. Are there more expensive ways to do it? Yes. There are ads all over the place. And I would recommend, if anybody's looking at that stuff and willing to spend ad money, that you join the Facebook groups. 20, what is it? 20 books to 50K, I believe it is. Those numbers might be flipped, but I think it's 20 books to 50K. And Wide for the Win. And they do a lot of talk about marketing and what's working for them. People will share their stats. They will share how they did the ads, and that stuff can be really helpful. So that's something that I would highly recommend to somebody who wants to learn about that and kind of passively for a little bit to observe. There's a lot of information. But yeah, other than that, I go back to pick the thing you're comfortable doing that you can do a little more naturally or organically as part of something you're doing, and focus on that thing.
Yeah, I know that I will post a lot of different things, but whenever I post a meme that really connects, I will end up with 200 new followers that day. And it's like, cool.
Right? And it's just like, okay, somebody shared it or something, and yay.
Yeah, but that's the one thing I've noticed. It's always the memes that kind of just get people. But anyway, so I want to go back to talking about your book in general. What was the inspiration? Because it ends up being set in Canada. Is there a reason you chose that as the setting?
I just had a friend in Alberta and we talked a lot, and I was able to ask questions about, and then also though, it's kind of a cheat because I live right up against the Rocky Mountains, and guess what the mountains are up there. So I was like, I'm familiar with the setting already, and it's just a little town. It's a non-existent town. I don't even think I give the name of it on purpose, but yeah, I was able to, I knew what it was going to look like, and so it wasn't a huge stretch, because if I set it somewhere else, I want to have been there. So uh the places that I write about, I will have been there, and luckily I've been all over the place and lived in several different states, so I've got plenty of places I can go.
So is this a standalone, or will we hear more about Selena?
Selena's story is going to keep going. Yeah.
So it's going to be a series.
Yeah.
Do you know how many, or is it just going to go till you feel the story is complete?
I don't have an end in sight. I want to take a page from Kelly Armstrong's book and end it while the ending is good, rather than beating that world to death until people are tired of reading about it. So it may not be as long as, say, Laurel K. Hamilton series. I want to end it at a good place.
And one thing I noticed is we can get subscribe to your newsletter on your website, thewarriormuse.com. But while I was there, I ended up finding some 10 random facts about you.
Yeah.
And I was very intrigued by a few of them. And I know one of them said, let's see if I can find it. There's two in particular that just really caught my attention. And it says, I was nearly kidnapped multiple times as a child/teen.
Yeah.
What's the story behind that?
So I have a couple and I have no idea why I was this target, other than, again, oldest of 5 kids, doing a lot of stuff on my own in an era where, we were doing that and we were getting kidnapped for it. But when I was a small kid in Salem, Oregon, we lived in an apartment, and a guy came and he was knocking on all the doors, and he had a Polaroid picture of me. And he said, "Hey, I'm looking for my daughter. Did you see her go into one of these apartments?" And so I just remember I walk up, and I was probably at that point, I was probably about 5. And I just remember walking up, and my mom standing at the door with it kind of closed tight to her, right? And her just putting her hand over my mouth because I was about to talk, and then shutting the door. And so I learned about that when I was older. She's like, "No, I haven't seen her," and shut the door. But so that really isn't an almost kidnapping, but that is certainly eerie, right? So I figured that's the closest to it. My big one was when I was living in Maryland, and I had a bit of a walk to the bus that I made by myself, and it was elementary school. And this guy kept kind of cruising by me. And here's the fun thing. I don't know if I would have known what to do or whatever, but we watched America's Most Wanted and Unsolved Mysteries and stuff. So, I had all that stuff in my head. But Yeah, he keeps cruising past me. So I'm already watching him kind of with the side eye. And then he finally pulls up and he says, "Hey, can you get in and show me how to get out of this neighborhood?" Well, even as a little kid, I knew how you came in is how you got out of the neighborhood, right? And so I was like, and I said, "Let me go ask my mom." And I ran, and I'm so thankful that in the 80s, people weren't locking their doors. I ran to the nearest house, opened the door, and walked into a stranger's house, and he took off. Because at first I said, "Well, I don't know." And then he tried to lunge at me, right? He tried to grab me and get me into the car. And that's when I ran in. So the people in the house, I could hear them. They had kids. They never knew I was in there because he took off. And then as a kid, I just went, okay. And then I shut the door and I finished walking to the bus stop, which is terrible because he could have come back. But, I think I did a smart thing at first. Maybe going back out there without telling an adult wasn't the smartest thing, but I was in elementary school. So yeah, that was the second. And then I had this really weird dude in a van that followed me every single day on the way back from school because I walked to my school at that point, and he would be waiting at the end of the path and he would just follow me. And it was bizarre. And then the next year I switched to high school and he figured out where I was. It took him a few days, and then he was waiting at the bus when I got there and would follow me home. I would just stare at this guy as I walked up to the house. He never made a move to take me into the car, but he followed me. And then one day he just stopped.
I
So
kind of have a similar story to your second one in that I was in fifth grade, still elementary, and me and a friend, and it might have been innocent. I don't know. But there was a building that was just, I mean, like you could literally see it from where we were. And this car full of three people, three adults, one in the back seat, two in the front seat. They were like, where is this? And I'm like, okay, you shouldn't be. My mom always said, adults shouldn't ask a child.
yeah.
And my friend kept pointing that way, and then they're like, "We can't hear you. Can you guys get a little closer?" I grabbed the back of her as she's walking there, and I'm just like, "Let's run!" So we ran, and it may have been innocent. It may have been innocent, but
I
that's.
don't think so. Yeah, come closer. We can't hear you. No. Oh,
I mean, like literally, it's like right there. We can see that building. That it's right there.
yeah. I was
But
bit like stranger danger was a huge thing I did with my kids, right? I went over with that. I had a book about it and everything, a kid's book that did it in a really cool way. I wish I remember what it was called, but and because I was like, you are not going to be in this situation. And I just remember talking to my daughter and saying, okay, what do you do after I had talked to them? What do you do if somebody grabs you? And she said, scream. And I said, yeah. And you bite and you kick and you poke them in the eyes and you do absolutely, you scratch their face, you do everything you can to get away from them. And her response was, well, that's not nice. And I was like, no, listen, you don't
I
want to be nice because they don't want to be nice.
I told my daughter that, you're not going to be stronger, but you can bite and you can use your fingers. I said,
Uh-huh.
you scratch somebody and you bite somebody because that's something that you can do to hurt. Because, like, you kick, you hit, you're not going to do anything to a grown man.
No. Right? I was like, scratch their faces, poke through their eyes, do anything you can. Like, if you were really mad at your brother, because my kids never really fought, but I was like, if you were really mad at your sibling, like, what would you do to hurt them? But yeah, just like that freaked me out so much when she was like, that's not nice. And I'm like, you're never going outdoors.
Okay, so I have to know the one more. There's a few that I was like, huh, interesting. But the one other one was, and especially because we're talking about horror here. You were in the car when a serial killer came after your mom in the 80s. Okay, what's the story behind that?
So that was also in Oregon. And yeah, now bearing in mind, I don't remember because I think I was 3, but I've heard the story since then. But yeah, what his MO was, I used to not give his name. I believe it's William Scott Smith. My problem is my mom knew him before. She was friends with his sister, his older sister, and she always called him Scotty. So I always have trouble remembering his name because every time I heard the story, it was just Scotty. So anyway, they had been out of contact for years. Obviously, she was a parent, and she worked in a movie theater at a mall in Salem, Oregon, and ran into the family there. And they were like, "Oh, hey, so you work here?" She said, "Yeah, at the theater." So the theory is that he probably then found out about that and he waited at the theater and followed her. But his MO was to hit a car, right? Have an accident in quotes there. And then he would then snatch the woman and do terrible, brutal things to her. So he tried to do that with my mom. And luckily, she was on her way to my grandparents' farm, which was, it's in Turner, Oregon, from Salem. It's not a terrible trek from there. And so she knew these back roads and he didn't. It was very rural. It was all in a forest. Like my grandparents had this great cattle farm in a forest. So free range. And so he's trying to get her off the road and he's following her. And she was able to get enough ahead of him that she could turn off into one of the long drives and shut down the lights because it was night. And he went right past, and he had been calling her ahead of time as well. So doing these little hang up breathing type calls, this was also something he did. And anyway, he bypassed her. He didn't try and get her again. And he got caught after his next one, which was a pizza delivery girl, because he did a stupid, like Son of Sam, where running her off the road, he ended up ditching his own car and had to call a tow truck. And that's how he ended up getting caught. Is the short version of that, because he was an idiot. But so he's in Oregon State Penitentiary now.
Where he should
But
be.
right. The interesting thing is one of my cousins is a prison guard there. And I always kind of want to ask, but I don't want to put her in that situation. So I never have. But hey, do you know this guy?
What's interesting is I actually grew up in a city that had a prison, and it's actually where some well-known prisoners have been. Well, there was a prison escape when I was very young. I have no memory of it. I was probably 3, 4. I don't know how old I was. But they hadn't yet heard the prison alarm to let us know, to lock our doors. And every so often we would hear it. And usually it was just a drill, I think. I don't think it was real. And well, this time it actually was real. And the door was unlocked. And the guy opens up our door, runs through our house. My mom is just with us, 3 little kids, and then goes out the back door. And my mom's just like, oh. But yeah, that's our little story, similar.
What's funny is that one of my grandpas was a dental surgeon and he did a lot of what I guess pro bono. I don't know what it's called with a dentist or whatever, but dental surgeon. Sorry, that would offend somebody. But part of his work was also to go into the prison. I don't know if it was like maybe it was like every 6 months. I don't know. Again, I was a kid. So he took me with once and my grandma. And so I got to eat in the cafeteria of Oregon State Penitentiary, which there's no way that would ever happen now, not in the 80s. But and for the longest time, I had the memory of it. I can still remember it. But the big memory I took away from it was how grossed out I was that my grandpa got a piece of cake and then poured milk over it. So, because I'm a kid, I didn't know where I was. And I'm like, and we were kind of this raised thing over. So I don't know what it looks like now, but I'm like, were we eating like, was it all staff in there at the time? Did you just bring a kid in to eat with prisoners? Like, what is the story here? I don't know. I don't know. He's gone now. But yeah, it's goofy little memory like that. Like, huh, all right. Because they were like these institutional green trays, like this light green that's not quite mint and that we were eating our food off of and everything.
I do have other questions, but I do have to mention that something too is like I remember my grandfather also pouring milk over chocolate cake and being
Uh,
like, huh. I actually tried it. It's not that bad. It kind of reminds you of having ice cream with, but
I
I was
bet I
curious.
can't do soggy food though. So
Anyway, so I would ask if you could. So we're going to talk back about books again, but if you could recommend one, either horror or urban fantasy book to me that is not your own, what one would you recommend?
that's not super scary though for horror. Have you read Kelly Armstrong?
No.
Okay. I'm going to say, and I can't remember, I think it's one word, the name of her first book, but I would recommend the Women of the Other World series. And
Okay.
the main character, it's been a while since I read these because she, again, ended it on a high and then went on to write other book series. But a lot of great female characters and just in general, great characters. But the main character, it might be Bitten is the first one. Um, she's a werewolf and she gets into, we'll say, some werewolf pack dynamics. But then other things are introduced through the series, and witches and stuff like that. So
There was a series that has a wolf aspect to it that I really loved. I don't know if you would love it, but like this, it starts out with Cinder. That one does not have
oh
the
yeah.
werewolves. The Lunar Chronicles. Have you ever heard of that?
Yes.
I love that one, and that one has that. Like I think it starts in the second, and that kind of that storyline continues on through the rest of it. But
Interesting. I think I just read the first one and then didn't
yes,
read any more of them. So
series I have to say gets better as you read it. Like I would say the first one I probably would have been like, yeah, it was good. And it was good enough for me to read the second one. And then I really enjoyed the second one. It was like it's one of those that got better as you read it. So
okay.
but
Yeah.
anyway, thank you so much for just talking with me, Shannon. I do have a question that I've been asking everybody. I used to ask a similar question last year, but now that I'm hitting my year mark of having my podcast, I changed it just a little bit. So, what is one thing that you have learned through the writing process since your first book, since starting your first book?
One thing that I've learned through the writing process that I'd pass along, just from talking to other people and encouraging them to try it and then hearing about it afterwards, if you write novels primarily, try writing a short story. Like, because I'll tell you why. It teaches you some great dynamics that you can then apply to novels as well, because it makes you say everything more briefly, introduce things faster, like characters and settings have to be right. So you have what, one paragraph to get somebody into that story right away. And if you've only written short stories, try novels because you need to expand your horizons all around. And both of them will teach you and inform on the other one, whichever you prefer doing. So that's my big thing. Cross pollinate.
I have thought about writing a short story, kind of related to mine, but I have not done it. So you've kind of given me inspiration to do that a little
No, they're great. I find short stories a little addictive because you get through
bit.
stuff a lot faster, you know, and
A
you
dopamine
explore
hit.
a lot more. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for chatting with me, Shannon. I really appreciate it. I also want to thank my listeners. I want to, if you have been listening for a while, please rate my podcast. This allows not only my podcast to get before more listeners, but my author's books to get before more readers. If you enjoyed this episode, you might also enjoy my episode with Carlos Rivera. He's the author, he's a horror writer and author of White Harbor. Again, I had the privilege of talking with Shannon Lawrence. She wrote the book Myth Stalker, Wendigo Nights. Very exciting. And you can check out her book on the show notes, or you can go to her website, thewarriormuse.com. Thank you again, Shannon. Really
Thank
appreciate it.
you.
Thank you for joining us in Author's Alcove, the writing corner. We hope today's discussion has inspired and informed your writing journey. Don't forget to subscribe, rate, and leave a review to help us reach more writers like you. And remember, we are brought to you today by the letter S, as in Scrivener, your partner in crafting and organizing your story. Again, if you would like to support me through Patreon, that is always appreciated. You can find both of these links in our show notes. You can also listen to us at Author's Alcove, the healing place, where authors share about their books on healing and recovery, or Author's Alcove, the reading nook, where we talk about fantasy, sci-fi, and the occasional horror. Until next time, keep writing, keep creating, and we'll see you back in the writing.